I never imagined that 12 words from my own son would redraw the entire map of my life. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. The kind of morning that feels ordinary until it isn't. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, casting soft rectangles across the wooden floor my husband had refinished himself years ago. The kettle whistled gently. I remember thinking, oddly, that life felt calm. Predictable. Safe. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and smiled automatically. My son's name lit up the display. For a moment, I expected a picture, maybe my grandson showing off a missing tooth, or my granddaughter holding one of her drawings. Instead, I read, "Don't expect me to take care of you when you're old. I have my own life and family." I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, slower, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something kinder if I stared long enough. They didn't. The kettle screamed itself dry on the stove, but I didn't move. My hands trembled slightly as I set the phone down on the table. I felt as though something invisible had cracked open inside my chest, quietly, without drama, but completely. There had been no argument. No tension. No warning. We'd had dinner together 3 days earlier. Laughter. Small talk. The usual stories about work and school and weather. Everything had seemed normal. So why now? I sat there for nearly an hour, my tea untouched, watching dust drift through the sunlight. I searched my memory for missed signs. For moments I'd ignored. For truths I'd softened because it was easier than facing them. I was 71 years old, widowed, healthy, and fully independent. I ran most mornings. Paid my own bills. Maintained my home. I wasn't asking for care. Yet somehow, in my son's mind, I had already become a burden. A life carefully built. For 32 years, my husband and I built our life with intention. We weren't wealthy, not even close, but we were disciplined. Careful. Proud of what we earned and how we spent it. We raised our son in a modest home in Portland. No extravagance, but no fear either. We saved. We invested when we could. We paid off our mortgage early. We planned, not for luxury, but for stability. When my husband died suddenly from a heart attack 5 years earlier, the ground beneath me shifted, but it did not collapse. What he left behind wasn't just money. It was structure. Security. A life designed to stand even if one pillar fell. I inherited the house. His pension. Our joint investments. It wasn't a fortune. But it was enough. Enough to live comfortably. Enough to help family. Enough to leave something meaningful behind. And for a long time, I thought I was doing exactly that. The son I thought I knew. My son had always seemed like a good man. He called regularly. Visited on holidays. Brought his wife and children over for Sunday dinners. We celebrated birthdays together. I babysat when I could. I helped when they needed it. Or when they said they needed it. A few thousand here. A few thousand there. A temporary emergency. A short-term gap. I never questioned it. Why would I? He was my son. It never crossed my mind to add it all up. It never crossed my mind to ask whether generosity had quietly turned into expectation. The first crack. 6 months before the text message, something shifted. My son called late one evening. His voice was strained, urgent. He said they needed money, $15,000, for medical bills. His wife's mother, he explained, was undergoing cancer treatment not fully covered by insurance. I didn't hesitate. I transferred the money the very next day. But a week later, during a family dinner, I asked casually how her mother was recovering. The room went still. My daughter-in-law blinked, confused. "Recovering from what?" she asked. My son jumped in immediately, too quickly. He laughed it off. Said I must have misunderstood. "It wasn't cancer treatment," he explained. "Just preventive care." The moment passed. But something stayed behind. A look. A pause. A feeling I couldn't name yet. From that day on, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. What I started to see. I noticed how conversations shifted whenever I mentioned finances. How my daughter-in-law's expression hardened when investments came up. How my son casually brought up assisted living, how it might be easier for me someday. I was 71, not 91. I ran 3 miles most mornings. I lived alone without issue. What exactly did they think I needed help with? Then came the suggestions. Subtle at first. You should simplify things. You shouldn't have to manage all this alone. We just worry about you. It sounded like concern. But concern doesn't usually circle money like a hawk. The message that changed everything. And then there was the text. No explanation. No context. No conversation. Just a declaration. Don't expect me to take care of you. I read it over and over again. I thought about responding a dozen different ways. I could have pleaded. I could have defended myself. I could have demanded an explanation. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I chose dignity. I typed 2 words. Okay. That was it. No argument. No drama. No begging. I hit send. And in that moment, quietly, without knowing it, I stepped into a version of myself I hadn't met before. A decision made in silence. That same afternoon, I called my attorney. We had worked together after my husband's death, updating documents and planning responsibly. He answered with his usual calm professionalism. "I need to revise my will," I said. He asked if everything was all right. I told him the truth. For the first time in a long time, I said, "Everything is very clear." And it was. I wasn't going to be anyone's safety net while being treated like an inconvenience. If my son truly believed he had his own life and family to focus on, then I would respect that. But respect, I realized, is not a one-way street. A quiet resolve. Over the next 2 days, I thought carefully. Not emotionally, deliberately. I reviewed documents. Made notes. Looked at numbers I'd avoided for years. Added up what I'd given. The total startled me. Over $40,000 in emergencies. I asked myself a simple question. Who actually deserved what I had spent a lifetime building? The answer came faster than I expected. By the time I walked into my attorney's office later that week, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. What I didn't know, what I couldn't yet imagine, was how violently my son would react when he realized that his future payday was disappearing. Because somewhere along the way, without my consent, I had stopped being his mother. And had become his plan. I thought rewriting my will would be a private, dignified decision. I had no idea my son was already watching my accounts, or that within days, he would storm into my life and reveal just how far he was willing to go when money was on the line. I didn't know my son had been watching my finances. That was my first mistake. Years earlier, after my husband's health scare, we had opened a small joint account, just in case. If something happened to me, my son could step in, pay bills, manage emergencies. At the time, it felt practical, responsible. After my husband passed, I meant to close it. I never did. I assumed trust didn't need expiration dates. I was wrong. The call I didn't expect. 2 days after my meeting with my attorney, my phone rang. I recognized the number instantly. I let it ring. Then again. On the third ring, I answered. "Mom," my son said. His voice was sharp, clipped. "We need to talk." "About what?" I asked calmly. There was a pause. Then, I saw a charge to a law office. "What's going on?" So he had noticed. The realization landed like a cold weight in my stomach. He wasn't just casually checking. He was monitoring. "Just updating some documents," I said evenly. "Routine estate planning. You can't just change your will without talking to me." That sentence changed everything. The entitlement in his tone. The assumption. The certainty that my decisions required his approval. "Can't I?" I replied. "It's my will." There was silence on the line, tight, restrained. "After everything I've done for you," he said slowly. "After all the years I've taken care of you." I almost laughed. "You've taken care of me?" I asked. "How?" "You know what I mean," he snapped. "I'm your son." "Yes," I said quietly. "And sons don't tell their mothers they're on their own." He tried to backpedal then. Said he'd been stressed. Said he hadn't meant it. But meaning isn't required for damage. Words don't ask permission before they cut. "I'm respecting your boundaries," I said. "You have your life. I have mine. Mom, don't be stupid about this." That was when I hung up. Anger is a kind of clarity. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From anger. From realization. From the slow understanding that I had spent years being generous to someone who saw me less as a person and more as a resource. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my financial records. Not casually. Seriously. Line by line. Transfers. Withdrawals. Loans. Small amounts that never felt dangerous on their own. But together? Over $47,000 in 4 years. Vacations disguised as emergencies. Repairs that never quite matched the receipts. Stories that changed slightly every time they were told. I felt sick. Not because of the money. Because of the trust. A new kind of protection. The next morning, I returned to my attorney's office. "I want a living trust," I told him. "And I want my primary assets transferred into it immediately." He studied me carefully. "That's a significant step," he said. "Once assets are transferred, access becomes limited." "I'm not doing this because I need access," I said. "I'm doing it because I need protection." "From whom?" he asked gently. I didn't hesitate. "My son." Saying it out loud felt like ripping fabric, but once torn, there was relief. We discussed details. Safeguards. Documentation. Medical records. Witnesses. He nodded. "You're thinking clearly," he said. "That matters." Before leaving, I added one more request. I want to close the joint account today. Cutting the invisible leash. I went straight to the bank. The manager, someone I'd known for decades, raised her eyebrows when I explained. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Everything is finally organized," I replied. The joint account was closed. A new personal account opened at a different bank. Automatic payments rerouted. The invisible leash was cut. I felt lighter walking out. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The trust is signed. By the end of the week, the trust documents were ready. House. Investments. Savings. Locked. Beneficiaries chosen carefully and intentionally, causes my husband and I believed in, people who had shown kindness without expectation. My son's name did not appear. Not out of spite. Out of self-respect. When I signed the papers, my hand didn't shake. I wasn't angry anymore. I was resolved. The calm before the storm. That evening, my phone rang again. Then again. Then again. I ignored it until the fifth call. "Mom," my son said, his voice strained now, not angry, but panicked. "Your bank account is gone." "I closed it," I said. "You can't just, what's happening? Are you sick?" The concern in his voice might have moved me once. Now I heard only fear. "I'm healthy," I said. "I'm just organizing my life." "This is paranoid behavior," he snapped. "Has someone been telling you things about me?" "No," I replied. "You told me everything I needed to know yourself." Silence. Then pleading. Then frustration. Then accusation. I ended the call. This time, my hands didn't shake at all. When he showed up. 2 days later, I was in my garden trimming roses when I heard tires screech into my driveway. A car door slammed. Footsteps charged toward me. My son burst through the gate, his face red, eyes wild. "What did you do?" he shouted. I stood slowly. "Lower your voice," I said. "This is a neighborhood." "That money was supposed to be mine," he hissed. "Dad worked his whole life for it." "For us," I corrected. "Not for your future debt." "I'll challenge this," he said. "I'll say you're not competent." "Try," I replied calmly. "I have records. Doctors. Witnesses. And a text message." His face went pale. "Get out of my house," I said. He left, but not defeated. Determined. Preparing for war. That night, fear crept in. What if he followed through? What if he tried to take control of my life legally? I didn't sleep. By morning, I called my attorney. We documented everything. Letters. Calls. Messages. Bank records. A formal statement was drafted, notarized, witnessed, clearly explaining my decisions and my reasoning. Not emotional. Factual. Unbreakable. He didn't come alone. The next visit came with backup. My son arrived with his wife. They stood on my porch like concerned professionals. "We're worried about you," she said smoothly. "People your age can be vulnerable." "Are you suggesting I've been manipulated?" I asked. "We're saying you're not thinking clearly," my son added. I pulled out my phone. Read his text aloud. Word for word. His wife's eyes widened. "You sent that?" she asked him. He looked away. They threatened lawyers. I welcomed them to try. They left furious. I stood in my doorway, heart pounding, but unbroken. I thought the confrontation would end things. I was wrong. Because a week later, my son returned, not with threats, not with lawyers, but with the one weapon he knew could still break me. My grandchildren. And that's when the real manipulation began. When I opened the door and saw my grandchildren standing on my porch, my heart betrayed me before my mind could catch up. My grandson ran forward first, a paper bag clutched in his small hands. "Grandma, we brought cookies." Behind him stood my granddaughter, shy as ever, holding her brother's sleeve. And behind them, my son and his wife, smiling. Carefully. Strategically. I knew instantly what they were doing. And I hated that it worked. The weapon they knew I couldn't ignore. I knelt down and hugged the children, breathing in the familiar scent of crayons and soap and something heartbreakingly innocent. Over their heads, I met my son's eyes. He didn't look apologetic. He looked confident. "We thought we'd surprise you," my daughter-in-law said brightly. "Such a nice day. We figured we'd spend some time together. Like old times. Old times. When kindness wasn't conditional. When love wasn't leveraged." "You should have called," I said quietly. My grandson looked up at me, confusion flickering across his face. "Grandma, don't you want to see us?" My chest tightened. Of course I wanted to see them. That was the point. A door I didn't want to open. I stepped aside. What choice did I have? They settled into my living room like they belonged there. My son on the couch. His wife unpacking cookies she knew were my favorite. The children coloring on the floor with supplies she had conveniently brought. Every detail was calculated. For 20 minutes, we made small talk. Weather. School. Sports. Nothing real. Then my daughter-in-law leaned forward. "We've been thinking," she said. "And we want to apologize." My son nodded. "I shouldn't have sent that text," he said. I was stressed. I didn't mean it. The words sounded practiced. "What exactly are you apologizing for?" I asked. There was a pause. "For hurting you," she said carefully. "For making you feel like we don't care." "But do you?" I asked. "Or do you care about my money?" The room went cold. When the masks came off, my son's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" I asked. "You've accused me of incompetence, threatened legal action, monitored my finances without my consent. And now you're here with cookies and children expecting what? Gratitude." "Lower your voice," he hissed, glancing at the kids. "Then you shouldn't have brought them into this." My daughter-in-law stood abruptly. "Kids, why don't you go play in the backyard?" The moment the door closed behind them, her smile disappeared. "Let's stop pretending," she said. "You have more money than you'll ever need. We're struggling. And you're hoarding it." "Struggling?" I asked. "You drive a luxury car. Your kids attend private school. That's none of your business. But my money is?" Silence. Then the threat. "If you don't reverse the trust," she said calmly, "you won't see the children anymore." The words landed like a physical blow. A line I could not cross. I stood up slowly. "Get out. Mom. Get out of my house." Now. My son's face twisted with rage. You'll regret this. The only thing I regret, I said, is not seeing who you were sooner. They left with the children in tow. My grandson looked back once, confused, waving weakly. The door closed. And I broke. Fear, fury, and resolve. I collapsed onto the couch, shaking. The room spun. My stomach rebelled. They had used my grandchildren as leverage. The lowest blow possible. But beneath the fear, something stronger burned. Resolve. I called my attorney immediately. They threatened to cut me off from my grandchildren, I said. His voice sharpened. Document everything, he said. That changes things. The legal strike. 3 weeks later, the letter arrived. From my son's lawyer. They were petitioning the court to have me declared mentally incompetent. I didn't cry. I called my attorney. Let them try, he said calmly. We're ready. The evaluation. The psychiatric evaluation lasted 3 hours. History. Memory. Logic. Finances. When it ended, the doctor looked at me kindly. There is no evidence of impairment, she said. None. I walked out feeling vindicated, but not relieved. Because I knew this wasn't really about my mental health. It was about control. The courtroom. The courtroom was quiet. Cold. My son wouldn't look at me. His lawyer painted me as confused, grieving, manipulated. Then the psychiatrist testified and dismantled their case piece by piece. The judge turned to my son. Why did you send your mother a message telling her not to expect care in old age? He stammered. You were upset about money, the judge said. And now you're upset that she's controlling her own finances. She looked at me. Are you aware of your decisions and their consequences? Yes, I said. Do you wish to change anything? No. The gavel fell. Case dismissed. I thought winning in court would end the nightmare. I was wrong. Because 2 months later, I received a letter that revealed the truth they'd been hiding all along. They weren't just angry. They were desperate. And their entire life had been built on money they never actually had. The letter didn't come from my son. That was the first thing that told me something was wrong. It arrived by registered mail, the kind that requires a signature. Official. Heavy. The return address belonged to a mortgage servicing company I didn't recognize at first. I almost set it aside. Then I opened it. The truth beneath the anger. They had missed 3 payments. The bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings. And somehow, because of paperwork filed years earlier, never updated, I was listed as an emergency contact. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the page, my coffee cooling beside me, a strange stillness settling over everything. So that was it. The expensive cars. The private school tuition. The vacations disguised as family emergencies. It hadn't been mismanagement. It had been denial. They weren't angry because I had hurt them. They were angry because I had ruined their escape plan. Sympathy I didn't expect. My first feeling surprised me. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't vindication. It was sorrow. They had children. My grandchildren. Innocent. Unaware. Trapped inside consequences they didn't create. But then another memory rose sharply. My daughter-in-law's voice, calm and cold. You won't see the children again. And just like that, sympathy hardened into clarity. Seeking the full picture. I didn't act immediately. I spoke to my attorney. Then I made a decision that felt uncomfortable, but necessary. I hired a private investigator. Not to punish. To understand. Just the facts, I told him. I want to know where the money went. What he uncovered was staggering. The illusion they lived inside. For years, my son and his wife had lived far beyond their means. Not on necessities. On luxuries. A boat used twice. International trips. Designer renovations. Private school tuition they could barely sustain. Over $200,000 in debt. And the most disturbing part? They had taken loans against my expected estate. Multiple lenders. Multiple promises. They had been so confident they would inherit everything that they had borrowed against a future that was never guaranteed. My future. A line I would not cross. My attorney asked the question gently. There is evidence here of financial exploitation. You could pursue legal action. I pictured courtrooms. Headlines. My grandchildren watching their parents collapse under public shame. No, I said. I won't do that. But I wouldn't stay silent either. The letter that changed everything. We drafted a letter together. Clear. Calm. Unemotional. It outlined what I knew. What I had documented. What I would not do. And one final truth. I would never again provide financial support. Not now. Not ever. But I left one door open, not to money, but to accountability. If you are ever willing to take responsibility for the harm you caused, the letter ended, and rebuild a relationship based on respect rather than expectation, my door remains open. I signed it. And sent it. Silence. For 3 weeks, I heard nothing. No calls. No threats. No manipulation. The quiet was unsettling. Then came Christmas Eve. A knock I didn't expect. I opened the door to see my grandchildren standing in the snow, holding the hand of a woman I didn't recognize. Behind them, parked on the street, was my son's car. He didn't get out. The woman introduced herself as a court-appointed supervisor. That was when I understood. They had lost the house. Bankruptcy proceedings had begun. As part of the process, supervised visitation with me had been ordered. Not offered. Ordered. Love without conditions. For 2 hours, my house was filled with laughter again. We baked cookies. Read stories. Watched snow fall against the windows. No manipulation. No tension. Just love. When they left, my granddaughter hugged me tightly. "Can we come back?" she whispered. "Anytime," I said. And I meant it. A different kind of victory. I watched the car disappear down the street. My son never once looked back. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt peaceful. Because I finally understood something I had resisted for years. Winning doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like boundaries. I thought losing everything would finally humble them. I was wrong. Because while I was rebuilding my life in peace, my son was spiraling deeper. And what I learned next would prove that his betrayal hadn't started recently. It had been planned for years. The truth arrived quietly. Not through a confrontation. Not through a courtroom. Not even through another threat. It arrived in a folder. Plain. Heavy. Final. My attorney placed it on the table between us and waited while I opened it. Inside were emails. Old ones. Years old. The betrayal I never imagined. My son had been planning this longer than I wanted to believe. The emails showed conversations between him and an estate attorney from years earlier, long before my husband passed. He had asked questions about inheritance timelines, about legal shortcuts, about what could be done if a parent was uncooperative. The attorney had refused to engage. But the messages existed. Documented. Time-stamped. I stared at the pages, my hands numb. This hadn't been desperation. It had been strategy. A choice not to destroy. My attorney spoke carefully. You have grounds to pursue criminal charges. I imagined my son in handcuffs. My grandchildren watching their father fall. No, I said. I won't do that. I wouldn't let his greed turn me into something I wasn't. But I wouldn't protect him from the truth either. The final letter. The letter I sent was firm. It acknowledged everything I knew. It made one thing clear. There would be no rescue. No bailout. No inheritance. But it also offered something else. A path, not to money, but to accountability. If he ever wanted to rebuild a relationship without expectation, without entitlement, without manipulation, my heart would be open. My finances would not. The life I built after. 6 months passed. Then a year. Spring returned to Portland in soft pink blossoms. I ran every morning. I joined a book club. I volunteered at the Children's Hospital, the same one named in my trust. I read stories to sick children. Held hands. Offered comfort. I watched my legacy take shape, not in dollars, but in impact. 3 students received scholarships in my husband's name. Letters arrived thanking me. Real gratitude. No expectation. Family redefined. My niece visited often. Friends filled my home. Music. Art. Travel. Peace. I wasn't lonely. I was free. The supervised visits with my grandchildren continued. They laughed. They grew. When they turned 18, they would each receive a letter, explaining everything, offering support, and reminding them that love never requires obedience. The fall of illusions. My son's life unraveled. Not because I caused it. Because it had been built on fantasy. Debt replaced comfort. Pride replaced humility. He never apologized. And that told me everything. The lesson that remains. That text message, the one that shattered my heart, gave me something I didn't know I needed. Freedom. The freedom to choose myself. To stop confusing obligation with love. To understand that boundaries are not cruelty. They are survival. Final reflection, audience hook. If someone you loved saw you only as a paycheck, would you have the courage to walk away? If this story resonated with you, remember this. You deserve respect at every age. You are not selfish for protecting yourself. And family is defined by care, not blood. Thank you for listening.